what are the mental tricks you have, or how do you overcome these behavioral and emotional traps like anchoring, and what advice do you have for us?
Well, that's a good question, and of course, in recognition of the fact that they can be traps and that you will be affected by them, and you will make some mistakes because of them. But Charlie, in poor Charlie's Almanac, which I proudly do take credit for the name of, and he talks about the various psychological traps that people fall into, and simply reading that section, you will come away wiser than before you started on it. Our personalities are such that Charlie and I probably are a little less prone to some of those mistakes than other people are. But as our record clearly indicates, we still are prone to them, and we make them, and we'll make them again. We're probably a little less inclined to make some of them than we were 30 or 40 years ago. But the nice thing about it is that if you make fewer of those mistakes than others, they will continue making their share, and you'll get very rich. Charlie?
Yeah, you don't have to have perfect wisdom to get very rich. All you've got to do is have slightly more than other people on average over a long time.
It's the old story about the guy outrunning the bear. I mean, I don't have to outrun the bear. I just have to outrun that other fellow. And
I think what has happened at Berkshire is just wonderfully for the good. And I do think we have a perfectly marvelous board. What makes me sad, as I said earlier, is I don't see more of the same practice followed elsewhere. A director getting $150,000 a year from a company who needs it is not an independent director. That director automatically becomes an inside director. And so it's a typical government intervention. It says it's doing one thing and it does another.
Yeah, I've been on 19 boards. I've never seen a director where the director's fees were important to them object to an acquisition proposal, object to a compensation arrangement of the CEO. It's just never happened, and in my experience, and they frequently do not behave as they would if they own the place, and basically we want people that behave as if they own the place.
The correct system is the Elihu Root system. Elihu Root, who had 3 different cabinet appointments, if I remember right, said no man was fit to hold public office who wasn't perfectly willing to leave it at any time. And if Elihu Root didn't approve of something the government asked him to do, he could always go back and be the most sought-after lawyer in the world. He had an identity to go back to, and he didn't need the government's salary. And I think that ought to be more the test in corporate directorships. Is a man really fit to make tough calls who isn't perfectly willing to leave the office at any time? My answer is no.
Yeah, we have one of our directors who's been removed twice from compensation committees of other corporations because he had the temerity to actually question whether the compensation arrangement being suggested was the appropriate one. I mean, it's being put on the comp committee of American corporations. As I've said, they're looking for Chihuahuas and not Great Danes or Dobermans, yeah. And I hope I'm not insulting any of my friends that are on comp committees.
You're insulting the dogs.
No.
What is the single most difficult decision you've had to make in your lifetime, whether it be business or personal?
I think I want to let Charlie answer that one first.
Yeah, I would argue that may be one that you shouldn't ask. Or let's put it this way. I think you should answer it with several interesting examples before you ask us to answer.
That's a little dirty. It's interesting. As Charlie was talking, I can't think of a lot of difficult. I can think of a lot of wrong decisions I've made, but I certainly can't think of. I can't think of anything I agonized over making for any long period of time. Like I say, that isn't, I mean, it's calling balls and strikes. I mean, you got a second there, and if you don't do it, that you're no longer an umpire. So I've made plenty of wrong decisions. I'm going to make plenty more. That's just part of living. But I don't think in terms of being difficult as measured by the time it took me to do it, or not a lot of them pop to mind, and if they do, I'll probably give you the same answer as Charlie. Charlie, have you thought of any more there while we were talking?
Oh. Let's go on to another.
Okay. That was not a bad decision. Number 8.
Would you say that the U.S. is, quote unquote, a castle with a moat? And if so, how can we make the moat any bigger? Thank you.
Yeah, well, the U.S. has been pretty remarkable, as I indicated in my earlier comment. I mean, essentially the same population pool, pretty much, and they've garnered over this 215-year period a remarkable share of the world's wealth. And it's an interesting question as to just why this group of people here have been able to do so much better than the rest of the world, considering we're not any smarter or anything of the sort. It's not an economic castle anymore. I wouldn't call it that. What we do is no secret. And I think that the relative importance of America, I mean, we have been a dominant factor in the world in post-World War II, and I think it will decline somewhat, although I'm not an alarmist on that. But I think to some extent the rest of the world, or some of the rest of the world, is catching on and adopting some, sort of best practices, as they say in industry. And our castle will grow in size, but there will be more castles around it, and I basically think that's a very good thing for the world. I think the more prosperous generally the rest of the world is, the better generally it will be for us. And I've talked about our trade problems. The more trade we have, the better. We had 1.1 trillion of real trade last year in the country. We would have with the world, and then we had another 600 billion, 6/10 of a trillion, that unilaterally we bought. Well, I would love to see the 1.1 trillion grow and grow and grow. It'd be good for us and good for the rest of the world. But I don't think that our prosperity will come in the future will come at the expense of the rest of the world at all. I do think that there were parts of the world that will grow economically from a lower base, but much faster than the U.S. And basically, I think that's a good thing. I mean, there's 6 billion people in this world, and a lot of them don't live very well. And I would hope that 20 or 50 years from now that a higher percentage of them would live well, but I don't think it comes out of our hide at all. Charlie?
Well, I don't think it comes out of our hide in that sense, but if for now the richest and most powerful nation in the world, and 50 or 100 years from now we're a poor third to some country in Asia, sure, we're richer, but it's a peculiar type of richness where you've lost your relative position in the world. It's not all. I think if I had to bet, I would bet that the part of the world that does best is Asia in terms of percentage gains per annum. And I think it might do amazingly well if it doesn't blow up in some way. And if it does amazingly well, it will eventually be a much richer place than ours.
Mm-hmm.